Senator, and so I'll call upon the mover to reply. Majority Leader, Senator Aaron.
Few days that this bill has been on the floor of the House, listening to colleague senators speak about a very live topic in our country presently. You will recall what has happened the last weekend, Madam Speaker, where for the very first time we are told the Most Reverend Philip Anyolo, though from quarters close to the conversation, I'm told I've seen the governor of Nairobi saying he's still awaiting his donation back. I saw him say somewhere that when he inquired, because they had said they have returned the donations, he was told that the fundi had already cut the material for the choir, because the donation was for uniform for the choir. Madam Speaker, so these are the challenges. So this is a very live conversation even in the country. And I shared yesterday something on my Twitter page. And of course, the know-it-alls that live on that space, Mr. Speaker, because they never accept to be corrected for anything, did not believe what I said. Today, this afternoon, I have tabled the report from the Labor and Social Issues, Social Affairs Committee, where I stated that over 90% of the respondents that sent in memoranda with regards to this bill actually opposed the bill, Madam Speaker. Just like many colleagues here, a good number have opposed. It's almost split evenly in the House. There's those in support of the bill and those that oppose the bill in principle. And I said that we live in an interesting country, Madam Speaker, because if you follow the conversation online, it's like there are two Kenyas. That's what I've realized. There's a Kenyan online, and there is a Kenya, the Republic, where you and I come from the villages, where Senator Mungatana, Senator Elomonen comes from. There are certain conversations which, if you follow in the Twitter and Facebook space, the kind of things that I said there, most of the time, Madam Speaker, don't exist or are not practical in the real world of the villages and the people that we represent in this House. Because for every village that I have visited the last few months since this conversation began, many pastors that have spoken to me, I gave the example of AIC Ziwani, where I was 2 weeks ago. I was somewhere in Kipkelion West, in my own county of Kericho this week. And the pastors continue to tell me, please, Majority Leader, you have a very bad bill that you want to stop Harambees. Like many of the colleagues that have spoken this afternoon, they are entirely, first of all, misinformed. So there are two issues. Number one, there is misinformation generally, because this bill does not ban Harambees. It only stops you and I, public and state officers, Madam Speaker, from presiding over. Otherwise, Harambees are permitted, Mr. Speaker. But second and most importantly, unlike the statements that I see from churches here, I saw from Jackson Olesapit, I saw from the Catholic bishops telling us that we need to put, that the church actually wants to put a stop on this. But it's not what preachers tell us in the villages where we come from, including in parishes of the Catholic Church. In my own office, even as I hear what is being said by the Catholic bishops here in Nairobi, in my own office in the village, Madam Speaker, or in our counties, many of these members will tell you that they have cards of pending Harambee invitations from the same churches, including Catholic and Anglican. That's why I say it's like there are two worlds in this country. Some space in the air called online, where you're chasing things that are unseen and people compete for attention and applause. Then the real world in the villages where we come from, where people tell us different things. Therefore, as a legislator, Madam Speaker, sometimes it is difficult to know which world to react to, Madam Speaker. Because the kind of instructions and the things that I see being said in the online space, Madam Speaker, and the information, I want to believe that the reason Senator Mungatana spoke the way he spoke about this particular bill, perhaps that is a brief that he has from the people he represented in this House, the men and women from Tana River who voted for him. And they are saying, Senator, this is what we expect. But I'm sure you are also bombarded by messages and Twitter conversations, or people telling you, stop this. We don't want it to exist. So, Madam Speaker, our work as legislators is increasingly becoming difficult. If you are not careful as a legislator, and I warned colleagues of ours sometimes back here, that you can easily chase air in the names of TikTok likes and followership online and miss the real conversation sometimes that happen back in the villages. Because at the end of the day, a legislator is a representative of the people, and you must find ways in which you capture the views of the people on whose behalf you vote in this House, Madam Speaker. And that includes those that are in the online space and those that are offline, Madam Speaker. Therefore, I have listened to the comments of colleagues about this bill, very interesting, some proposing a total rejection, some proposing, like Senator Ledama, that don't just ban Harambees, look also into charitable organizations that run 1 or 2 charity activities in the country to ensure that they do this in strict compliance with our laws, Madam Speaker, that you ensure that in the contributions that they receive from donors abroad, Madam Speaker, the same is actually shared for the intended purpose of those who are making those donations. To those, Madam Speaker, that agree that we need to stop members of the public and state officers, Madam Speaker, from participating in fundraisers for the sole reason that it is one of the avenues through which we can demonetize our politics and reduce the influence of money in our politics, which, like the good Bible says, Madam Speaker, money is the root, actually, to evil. And many times when money is not prudently used, Madam Speaker, it can be used for bad things in our society. Therefore, Madam Speaker, my proposal will be that in such a time as this, where you have a report of the bill, you have members who have a divided opinion, before eventually putting this to a vote, it will be good to consult further and listen if, Madam Speaker, whether there is a way that the bill can be enriched, Madam Speaker, or do we lose the overall intention? Because there are those that have taken issue, for example, with the fact that you are proposing committees through which you can not per se regulate, but a reporting mechanism where the CEC in our counties and the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Madam Speaker, can receive reports of some of these public fundraising appeals, Madam Speaker. And this is important, Senator Mungatana. I wouldn't wish that we lose that even in this conversation. Because how many times have you been invited to fundraisings where months later, if you try to go and check whether that money was actually used for the intended purpose, you cannot establish whether that happened or not. And therefore, there was a proposal. Maybe the mechanism that has been proposed needs to be refined. It is at this time that many people are beginning to speak on this topic and say, give us more time to make our contribution. Maybe, with leave of your office, Madam Speaker, it will be an opportune time to provide additional time for people to either think through and share their amendments before eventually taking a vote on this bill, Madam Speaker, including calling for submissions from members of the public. I said this yesterday on my tweet, and this is the accurate information. The report that is before the House bears me witness that there is no religious organization that sent in a memorandum on this bill. And that is quite curious, because I see people speaking very strongly. I expected to see the Catholic Church, I expected to see the Anglican, at least the two of them that have spoken publicly in support of this bill, Madam Speaker, to send in memorandum in support, Madam Speaker. There are also others that have spoken in opposition to the bill. At least it will have enriched our work as legislators, Madam Speaker, to benefit from their perspective, Madam Speaker. Therefore, this is an interesting conversation that the country needs to have with itself before the conclusion and the final determination of what to do with this particular bill, Madam Speaker. And therefore, as Majority Leader, I will be writing to the Speaker, seeking for additional time for first, consideration of additional views, and second and most importantly, to give legislators time to reflect and perhaps seek more opinion from your own people. Senator Mungatana, it will be good for you to ask the people in Tana River, including the young people that perhaps at the time where this conversation began, let's not lose track of history. This conversation began at the height of the so-called Gen Z protests, Madam Speaker, and I'm sure there were young people in Tana River who spoke and said, we don't want politicians in our churches, we don't want to see them make donations, and so on and so forth. It will be important to listen to them over this weekend, especially as they speak in a large gathering at your village back in Garsen, you know, Mr. Speaker, so that they speak, Madam Speaker, sorry, so that they speak and instruct you in the presence of the rest of the voters, and they can hear what the feedback from the rest of the voters will be before you eventually cast your vote, Madam Speaker. Because at the end of it, Madam Speaker, this conversation is about trying to reduce the influence of money in our politics, Madam Speaker. And let's not pretend here. Harambees form part and parcel of our body politic, and the kind of contributions that people make eventually has an influence in the determination, Madam Speaker, of whether to vote for a candidate or not. It may not be the only determinant, but many of the times, Madam Speaker, it has been used as a yardstick to gauge your abilities and your prowess, Madam Speaker, in terms of marshalling resources, and people use it even as a determinant. Madam Speaker, if you are not careful, and if you do not put a check on this space of fundraisers, Madam Speaker, in another 2 or 3 cycles of Parliament, you will have these houses filled up with wash-wash characters, Madam Speaker, because increasingly it is becoming difficult, Madam Speaker, even to campaign on issues. How many times do these members of this House go out to campaign, Madam Speaker, and before you address a gathering, people don't want to listen. They tell you, we've had those stories before. They're already queuing and saying, just finish with us. We know what we'll do at the ballot, Madam Speaker. Therefore, we will have to be intentional. And it's not just by way of fundraisers, Madam Speaker. It includes the overall influence of money as a mobilizing tool, as a determining factor in who gets elected into Parliament and positions of leadership, Madam Speaker. We have campaign financing laws, but how effective are they, Madam Speaker? You remember when you were running for last election, we were supposed by law, Senator Mungatana, to open an account, you know, through which you channel your public, your campaign finances, you know, and manage it, then file returns to IBC. How many politicians observed that, Madam Speaker? So until there's intention on us as a legislature, Madam Speaker, to show that we are going out of our way to reduce the influence of money in our politics, then it will be difficult, Madam Speaker, for us to fight corruption, the biggest evil that our society continues to hoggle and fight about, Madam Speaker. And you know, this is not just about us as a political class. In fact, many of the beneficiaries of corrupt practices, though people imagine that it is we in the political class, it is actually those that are in public offices that are not necessarily political appointees, Madam Speaker. They are the ones who run tenders, Madam Speaker. They are the ones who do many of these so-called government projects. Perhaps what eventually gets to the political class is a fraction, and a very small fraction, as compared to what remains with the rest of. Take time to reflect before eventually taking a vote on this issue. I have noted and I have said that there are members who have raised serious concerns about how to address certain issues. I will be notifying the Speaker. Luckily, I have Standing Order number 66.3 that allows the request for putting of a question until a later date. In the intervening period, Madam Speaker, we could take that opportunity to either consult further and make listening to more memorandum from members of the public with regards to this particular bill. I will inform the Speaker of this request by way of a letter so that perhaps we can make an eventual decision actually on this particular issue. With those many remarks, Madam Speaker, I beg to reply and request that in accordance to Standing Order number 66.3, we defer the putting of a question until a later date when all these other things that I've mentioned have happened. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Majority Leader. That request is granted. We defer the putting of the question, and you can dispatch that communication to